It's awesome to see you here. Um, it's been quite a crazy time in the background, obviously. With the pandemic at all, and I'm so excited that we would do this, kind of project together. So for the people out there, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Ashley Feraude, and I'm the Director of Marketing. And we work together on a project called Brainstorm. That's an artistic installation at the Canberra Centre.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. And how, can you tell us a little bit of the about the story of how we actually met, and what kind of projects we've done together?
Yeah, sure. Actually, there's two sides to this story. I guess originally we met because I was doing the Home Story series, which is on Hey Canberra, and looking, for, once again, interesting people around Canberra to do home stories on, and your name came up. And I thought it was kind of interesting to always check out a person whose studio is mostly in their home. And when we decided to, find a date and all the rest of it, and when I arrived, I think we got so stuck on talking about your artwork and specifically all the things that you had in the garage. I don't think we even made it through the rest of the house. We just did most of the story about that and the outside bit that you were drawing some paintings in or some works in. And then I kind of realized that actually the story was less about your home and more about the fact that you were creating this piece of artwork commissioned for one of your clients, who was then going to place it inside their property into a custom piece. And so I thought, that's cool. Let's just write a story that's called The Birth of an Artwork. And that went to Hey Canberra, and they obviously published it. And it was a really nice story about how you essentially created that piece, and then ultimately what it looked like when it was put into the property. The property wasn't finished, but your artwork definitely was. And then, fast forward a couple of months, I was working on the project for doing the installation at the Canberra Centre, and I was trying to think of a way that we could repurpose an existing piece that we had from something that we did for Enlighten.
Yep.
And because it was technically a shape that was set to be the size, or actually not the size, the shape of a brain, but the size was roughly about 2 meters across. It was stretched in this kind of fabric, and I kind of thought, technically speaking, this is a canvas, and two things collided, and I kind of thought, hang on for a second, if I reach out to you, we could potentially do something with the brain to bring it to life. And I did have a vision of what the rest of the installation would look like.
Yep.
And that was really that. I remember we did an artist mock-up at University of Canberra, the design team. I think I sent it over to you and I said, this is what we're thinking. You said, sounds good, but how the hell do I paint on that? And there was a lot of conversations about the technicality of how we were going to do it. And oddly enough,
that's right.
The solution ended up being the very first thing we said anyway, but we tried a whole bunch of things around it just to make sure that was the best solution to do. And it was. We ended up with the piece as it is, and it went into the Canberra Centre. When did it go? Sometime at the end of September. So
just before these crazy lockdowns started happening, right?
Well, people got to see it for there's a lot of comments for 2.5 weeks. So hey, I'm happy with that. So,
it was really cool because some of my fans on Instagrams, they came to me and they said, hey, we just saw it from the Canberra Centre, it's crazy, you're in the Canberra Centre, creating this kind of artwork, and especially the light reactive component of it as well. When we actually put that together, really added something to it. And just like they were really excited about it, that you're doing this stuff during the pandemic. It's a bit wild.
Yeah. Well, the truth is that you just have to continue with things as much as you can and have plan Bs. We obviously weren't thinking that we'd get locked down for the whole entire period. And like I said, the artwork was up there, even including the downtime, for over a month. And usually you only get a run for about 2 weeks on those kind of things because there's lots of stuff going through that. So that was amazing. But the fact that we only got 2 weeks in the end of eyeballs on it, I'm still thinking, hey, I'm really thankful. And even if I knew that it was 2 weeks, I still would have pressed ahead to get it done for that period because it's worthwhile for the amount of commentary and feedback that we got for sure.
Yeah, it was really cool. I think it created a really cool, like an inspirational ripple. Like everything's kind of shutting down, and there's all this, there's all this uncertainty happening in the world at the moment. Obviously, with the pandemic. I think it's a quite an exciting project to undertake, during this time, and just through the process of how it kind of started, like with experimenting, on the first layer, the actual material that covered the brain, and and ultimately that becoming actually the kind of stepping like a stepping stone to the rest of the project. It was a really, really cool thing to do, really quite exciting. But yeah, man, look, it's been a wonderful project to do. And the other thing is that a lot of like my like because I'm starting this kind of blog type thing, and it's very new for me. I want I want the viewers to kind of get a sense of the process that kind of went into to undertake such a project, right? Because you had your design team that were mocking up, the kind of 3D, the CAD, versions of it, where you can actually kind of imagine, you can actually walk through this installation, what it's going to create, and all this stuff. Just if you can lead through, the viewers a little bit of that process, a little bit like how it kind of came to be.
Yeah, sure. So the interesting thing is, obviously, because I'm in marketing, I have to be honest in the sense that because I'm spending the university's money and resources and time to doing something like this, there always has to be a result that's attainable from something like this. And not to kind of put a commercial end on it, but there's a sensibility attached to projects like this where I have to think of the way that the end result will essentially appeal or engage with a particular audience.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't take any of the fun out of it. In fact, it kind of sets some parameters around things, around what it is that we're trying to achieve. So based on that, I knew that I was after a piece that would definitely capture attention, because it's very easy to do things which kind of fade into the background when they're a little bit mediocre, or even not mediocre, but essentially subdued in what they're trying to communicate. Or you could go the wrong way and kind of create something that just is purely marketing, where
100%.
really you're just selling a message and that's it. And that's fine, but there's advertising spaces to do that. Well, what we were playing with here was a little bit of a three-dimensional large space. And really it kind of came to this thought that I've got a couple of audiences. If I really go first and foremost, it's the public that are going to see it and the interpretation they're going to give to it. That's one. Two is the relationship we have with Canberra Centre. In other words, that space is not a blank canvas to do anything. It has to still make sense with the relationship of other things that take place in Canberra Centre. Now, even if you look at their partnership with Enlighten or even Feraude, they do kind of some really nice, colourful, engaging stuff in there that's artistic. And I kind of thought, okay, well, that'll work. That'll work with that kind of approach. So that was the second thing. And the third thing, of course, if you start to work with an artist, you have to allow for interpretation of that in such a way that they can still feel freedom. In other words, it's not me coming to you and going, I want you to do it exactly like this, because then it's just a production thing for you. There has to be an ability for you to kind of go, okay, well, I could do it like this, I could do it like this. And in fact, that bit of not knowing of what it's going to turn out like, despite that it's slightly scary from a marketing perspective, is actually the exciting bit, because it's where the magic happens,
True.
And it's also then not so much about my personal preference of aesthetics and other things, but once again, I'm thinking, will people react interestingly to it? Will they go, what the hell is this? And doesn't mean everyone has to like it. I just want them to ask the question and go, wow, they've really gone out and did something different.
Yeah.
And that was it. So there's a whole bunch of parameters with it. So when we put up the original kind of artist impression of it, I did have an idea of what the brain would look like with your kind of approach, but not in detail, just roughly enough to then work with the other assets that would be there. And it was enough for them for me to pitch that into the Canberra Centre and make sure they're happy with it, which they were. And then it also gives you a feeling of what we're working towards. Then really the next step was the production part, which was challenging, because it would seem basic enough that you could do what you do on a three-dimensional space. You haven't, but I guess in my head, I'm like, you'll nail this, no problem. You've done shoes before and all this other stuff. So realistically speaking, not a problem. What was challenging was the idea of how the paint would work with the surfaces that we had, How does it
Exactly
not
right.
all droop? You know, how does it not
Yeah,
look like a school project? You know, how does it
yeah,
actually
yeah,
look
yeah.
like a piece of art?
Bit of high
And
art. Yeah,
originally my idea was that this gigantic space that we had, which was essentially that wireframe of the brain, I was really keen on filling it with something that was relatively strong so that your paint could, you know, kind of work off that.
yeah, yeah.
But of course, filling a space like that with something is by far more difficult than one thinks. And I thought of everything. We thought of like jamming material in there, but of course that absorbs paint. Then we
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
of other stuff. And actually the thing that we landed up on was, I think I remember talking to Chris, who's the studio production manager at UC, and I said to him, hey, what if we got like a really strong balloon, like a weather balloon, stuck it in there, blew it up, and then if you think about it, it would look like a brain because it would have the structures with the little bubbles everywhere and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
You
yeah.
thought I was pretty crazy, but I'm like, look, let's just try it. I'm going to go and buy a weather balloon, like the stronger ones that got pretty high. Let's try it. Needless to say, we did. We got it in from wherever I bought it from, some weather observing thing.
Yeah.
You came in, you know, you applied your first paintbrush and all the air went out, and that was the end of that. It was just this flat thing on the ground with a couple of paint splashes.
I'll never
Of
forget
course,
that. I'll never
yeah.
forget that. I literally just the first bit of paint I propelled on it, and it just went boom, and it's gone.
So the funny
It
thing
was the
about
best fail I've ever had.
no, and we did think that might happen, but it was just worth trying. And what's funny about it is I remember saying to Chris, I'm not going to be there because I don't want to be there when the thing pops. And anyway, and unfortunately, Chris said he'd love to be there, but he missed it as well. He just came back and there was just you standing next to this flat thing. But anyway, so we obviously went to plan B. And what we did is we said, let's go back to looking at what that material, this was kind of like the silky kind of material that we had on the brain. Let's just see that work. So we got the brain in, we wrapped it back into its original skin. You gave it some splotches and you said, you know what, this works. It works because it is drying, it's not sagging too much. And really the only thing that we found is, I think the amount of work, and tell me if I'm wrong, but the amount of work or layers that were required to make it work were by far more than we're anticipating. In other words, you couldn't just go a bucket of paint and it's done.
Nah.
The intricacies had to be so massive that you did like 4 or 5 different nights of different painting techniques on top of it. And you had to turn it around upside down and all this kind of stuff, just make it work from all angles. So that was a lot of work in that respect.
It was a bit, right? It was this thing where you adapted to the situation. So that material, like I was guessing it was some kind of polyester, elastane kind of mix, and just, I don't want to go into too much technicalities, but the point is that with the quality of the paint that we're using, and I'm just going to plug in you know, permaplastic and permaset paints here a little bit because they're pretty amazing. And of course, you know, they sponsored this thing as well. But what really kind of came together was the way that those paints kind of interacted with the actual sculpture. And by creating those kind of layers, so you're basically starting out, at first I started a more kind of thinner layer that would start out more like a tie-dye kind of look for the surface, right? So it's a lot more aqueous, it's a lot more fluid. And then I started to have a bit more confidence with it as I went into it, because it got a little bit more kind of like you know, like you start to feel it a bit more, how it's all kind of coming together, it's, you know, shaping up. And then I started to actually start to propel, you know, the actual paint swirls and all those kind of you know, ways to kind of pre-mix the paints and then propel it in many different ways all over the surface, and to see how that interacts with topology and the, you know, the shape that makes up the whole, you know, the, you know, geometric form of the brain. And you're right, we had to turn it over and everything, which is a bit of a challenge. Then you'd have to wait for that to dry, and then layer by layer, literally building it up, you know, like a sculptor takes away the clay or whatever. In this case, it was like subtly kind of intermixing those layers so that aesthetically the overall result would have enough of that oomph and the vividness that we were looking for, right, for this project, right? And it's really cool because it kind of it extended the work that I did on my 12-meter voyage artwork, but it brought it into the 3D sculptural realm, which was really cool. So for me, it was wonderful to push those boundaries and to take it a lot further and to take me out of my comfort zone. And I don't have many comfort zones, but this was outside my one, right? So So that's why I love this project. I jumped on it immediately because I could see that this was going to test both of us, right? But we would discover a lot of awesome things along the way. And I think that's what was really awesome about it. So
Yeah, actually,
yeah,
I'll share something with you.
yeah, man.
If I think of the end product of what it looks like,
Yep.
it actually, in terms of its effect, is pretty much 100% what I imagined it to be.
Yeah.
The only thing that was different, and this is the interesting aspect of it,
Yeah.
just maybe because I remember looking at a lot of your work, and yes, it's complex, but it's not so it's not dense in terms of how much stuff is going on in the small spaces. Now, because we're working with a much larger canvas, so to speak, and three-dimensional,
Yeah.
it is. So in other words, if you wanted my vision of what I thought I was going to end up with,
Yeah.
imagine the current, what you've done, the current artwork, but imagine if rather than having it at that detail, we would have blown into it and then had that shape. So in other words, if I was talking in graphic design, I would have just shifted closer into the pattern and then use that as a wrap. So it's almost more, it ended up being more detailed than I was expecting it to be, which I think was a result of, there is the way that you had to do this with this particular structure, but two, also the fact that you kind of felt that without that complexity, just almost looked a bit basic at that size, at least for the work that you do. But but it's interesting how that, once again, that weird magic happens, and at the end of the day, I don't think you could have done any different. Short of, actually, the only thing you and I played around with, remember how you and I said, well, if the canvas wasn't white, because by the way, that wrap or whatever it was a white color, and it was actually light translucent. I said, imagine if that was actually originally black, or perhaps even a strong undercurrent color like a dark blue. I think then maybe, yes, you could have got away with having less of the complexity.
Correct.
But because you had to fill every single part of that,
it had to have it.
You know what I mean? You're then really jamming all the detail in. So that's an interesting point.
That's right. That's right. No, it's really interesting because it started out one way, and then through the natural process, when you're discovering the limitations of the materials and everything around it, right? You've got all these parameters, right, that you work with. It basically lent itself to becoming a lot more detailed, right? And because I was imagining, a more kind of minimalistic approach in the beginning, but it's just that through the complexities of the geometry and everything, and the qualities of the material that you're working with, right? In order to test it and start it, you kind of have to have that as an anchor, right? So then that detail has to come all the way through. But the challenge for me was to make it so that the detail is not disorientating detail, and then it cancels itself out because there's so much stuff going on, right? It becomes noisy, but it's actually quite interesting, so that it has areas where it has contrasts, it has really nice kind of, this kind of movement in it. And then I went with it because we went back to the design, the actual design. Remember with the lightning bolts, which were exploded out from the brain, right? It's because it's a 3D form. And when you actually have those electric spark lines and branches, right? Because that's what the artwork is comprised of. That spreading into the lightning bolts, I think held the whole installation together. It's a really nice kind of design cue that kind of went through, right? And that's a discovery thing. You go through that. It's like the same thing when I'm creating a painting. Something happens which is unexpected, right? And then you literally go with the flow. You run with it. You see where it will take you. And this is what the project really did. So,
hey, I've got a question for you, just a very quick one. Let me just use blue poles because heaps of people know that piece by Pollock, obviously at the NGA, for all sort of reasons, whether originally political or right through what it means to Australians now. So it's interesting because I worked with the NGA. I used to ask people what it is that they loved about the painting so much. There are people there who come back regularly and they newies and all the rest of it. And there's a couple of different opinions, and people either love it or hate it. That's normal. Some grow to love it in time, just like all art. But what was interesting is that people tend to either perceive it as a whole. In other words, they look at the painting and its colorful intricacies, and they kind of, yes, they can see the poles, or however they perceive that. But what they're really looking at is that it's a mishmash of color and texture, and in your eyes it plays with some kind of tricks, and therefore it develops shapes. But really, all they're looking at is that.
Yeah.
The people that really love that painting stare at it and get deeper meaning from it, right? In other words, they see further beyond the, I don't want to say the technicality, but the kind of very first initial seeing of that you get of it.
Yeah.
And they've started interpreting what that really means, right? Now, you could argue this in a couple of different ways, that there isn't any meaning in the first instance. It's just that we as human beings tend to do this. Or that, in fact, yes, there's a communication that the artist Pollock was trying to do in terms of what he was trying to communicate through that. And you are actually hearing him, you know, through the artwork.
Yeah.
Like I said, you could interpret this in whichever way you want. I guess my question to you is, with a piece like that, or actually with any of your pieces, do you want people to look at it the way you describe it, where, you know, you go look at the beautiful movement of color and the depth, and how this piece is almost alive because of the colors that are being used and everything else? Or do you want them to go even further and start to interpret things that are meaningful to them or to yourself? But do you want them to go further than that? Like, what are you trying to get out of people with this stuff?
Well, now that is a phenomenally awesome question. And that's something I've been asking myself through my processes as well. Firstly, with Blue Poles, that's a big inspiration for me in the very beginning of my journey as well, because of the whole story behind it. Not only the story in terms of what, you know, what academia know about Jackson Pollock and what he was intending to do, but what actually is the effect of his artwork on people who don't really normally understand art, and the people that have all the academia and understanding behind it, right? So when I looked at it, I was like, well, this is a very free form type of painting, right? It informed the way that I looked at, you know, my painting process, and I wanted to incorporate that bit of freedom, that unconscious movement and energy and stuff like that, right? And the way that I saw it as well through my process, when I started to invent different techniques and, you know, create like my own stamp on the process and the techniques, right? Because you learn, you know, like you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? It's a classic Isaac Newton term. You know, you learn from the past and you progress further and further. And the way that I looked at it is that the process itself lends, it lends itself to opening up the imagination through obviously the technical complexities and parameters of the artwork, right? So in terms of the actual techniques itself, in terms of how you have movement, line, you have you know, all these kinds of technical qualities which the viewer sees, but then at the same time the viewer also has their imagination, the way that they can open up and unpack an artwork, right? So the way that I looked at it was that if I'm going to create art, I want the person to see a little bit, it's like a window into the actual process and how it came to be this. But at the same time, without revealing everything, although ironically it is all revealed because it's in front of you, the beauty of this is my theory is that it sparks a lot of things in you. And sometimes it hits different people differently, as you said, right? Because art is, you know, it's for different people. But I think that intrinsically, you know, to the person, they investigate it in their own way. And I love that some people, they're more sensitive to it. They're able to see certain things in the, you know, in the abstract form of it, right? So they can say, well, this reminds me of this, and you know, from a past memory or something, right? But it's all organic. I mean, the beauty of Pollock's work is it's organic, you know, like fractal mathematicians looked into it and they found extraordinary, you know, patterns that are emerging out of it. And it's not so random, you know, there's all this amazing stuff that something that's so random is actually quite well organized, right? Even though it's free. And it's a paradox. It's a living paradox, right? And that's why I create art, because it allows, you know, it allows me to see further of what I do, and it allows the viewer to go a little bit further, you know, into their mind and their imagination, because for that moment in time, they're focusing their attention on this. And then depending on how sensitive they are, they can kind of see into it a certain way and so on. That's why I love art in general. It opens up so many possibilities, right? And that's a beautiful, you know, that's a beautiful way to introduce it to anyone. I think Jackson Pollock, Blue Poles, you know, you look at like Damien Hirst, right? I mean, I'm starting to love Damien Hirst because I understand the story behind it.
Yeah.
You know, and there's all this kind of, there's amazing stuff behind it, right? So it's very
Yeah.
valuable, you know, you know, for the culture and for people just to open up their imagination a bit. It's really cool.
Yeah, indeed. The other thing I was
Yeah.
going to quickly talk about,
Yeah.
and we kind of touched on this as well, but I thought it might be interesting for people to note that there is most certainly a relationship and a sensitivity around getting artists to do commercial work. So what I mean by that is that whole thing that I spoke about in terms of the audiences, and ultimately this being a project that was born out of a marketing idea. And, you know, marketing and art, it's weird. They're not the best of friends because marketing gets tend to be seen as the sellout of things. Yet, of course, art needs marketing to bring viewers to it. And in fact, there are many examples of application of art in marketing in beautiful stuff, most likely in design and all that kind of stuff. And also there's been some unbelievable artists who have been in marketing, advertising, who ended up being artists in the other way around. Magritte, for example, famously. But my point of all of this is there's most certainly a relationship in that. And what I mean by that is that even though I had an idea, or at least the designers and I had an idea around what that would look like, you and I most certainly spoke about changes in it to kind of fit with that vision. And it's a careful conversation because, I mean, you're very easy in that respect. So I had no issues there. But you could imagine the situation where somebody that isn't the artist telling the artist, I was actually thinking it could be more like this, so you should add more like this. That's fine in a marketing world because you're paying someone for a service, which is why you can always tell a graphic designer, hey, could you make the logo bigger, right? Yeah, but it's a different relationship with the artist. And
agreed.
I guess what I'm trying to say here is that the way to manage that is, number one, to set the boundaries in the very first instance. So we were very clear about what you and I were trying to do. And that there were some parameters that we're working to, but also I kind of spoke to you about things where I thought, oh, maybe if we could change it like this, and, you know, maybe could we make sure there isn't any white left over? The way that I was actually interpreting it is because I was saying to make it as true as possibly it can be to the way that you show things. I would feel that it should be completely filled in, you know, and you kind of went, yeah, let me kind of work that out.
Yeah, of course.
But of course, you know, if you objected at some point and said, no, as far as this is my piece, and as far as I'm concerned, this is done, you know, that would have been a conversation we would have had to have. Yeah, and you're right in kind of having that position, and then we would come from a different point of view. But I did want to talk about the fact that if anyone's ever dealing with artists, or if an artist, for example, who's listening to this blog, deals with somebody who wants a commission, to always really set the parameters of the fact that actually this is a two-way relationship, unless whoever's purchasing your work says, do your thing, I just need it in this shape, you know, which is a bit easier to work with. But especially if you're doing kind of collaborations and partnerships like this, there is a bit of toing and froing. And we're not trying to put marketing onto everything, nor is an artist trying to make it completely their own work either. It's most certainly a good relationship. And like I said, you're very easy to deal with, and I've been very lucky with every other artist I've worked with. But I'm aware of the fact that people can get, rightfully so, precious about what it is that they're trying to do. Just like some marketing people can get way too progressively pushing about, you know, having the logo stamped right in the middle of the artwork. So not that we did it here. So.
Not that we did it. The whole artwork is a stamp, right?
No, so actually, well, here's the thing. So the whole logic was that people would look at this thing and go, what is this? Get engaged by it. And the moment you got them engaged, that's when you say, this is a partnership between us that you see and that. And that's all you need, because people kind of go, this is great, that's fun with this. And they're providing us a bit of entertainment or insight or engagement. And then saying, by the way, we did it, just so you know that it's us, rather than leading with a marketing statement. And I think it's good to be doing stuff like that. And I think audiences really appreciate that.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I think that in the future, there'll be a lot more projects of this type, I think, because I think we've started something pretty exciting where you start with something that's a bit quirky, it's a bit different, you know, it's different from the mold, right? And that's going to start hopefully a precedent, you know, to the future, to starting these different new things as kind of, you know, I mean, it changes things, right? And I think it's really wonderful, especially during this time especially now in this time when there's all this fear and stuff outside. It's like sometimes you got to shift the emotion and the focus just a little bit. You know, sometimes just have a moment to breathe. You know, have a bit of a meditation on something else, right? You know, and I think it's been a really wonderful partnership. I mean, I've gotten together with an institution, an amazing institution, University of Canberra. You know, you're going to be defining the smarter, the educated, people of the future. And at the same time, even though you're an institution, you're actually opening up yourself to more artistic and creative pursuits, which is outside of the framework. So I think this is a very wonderful thing. And
it is.
I'm quite glad to be, and I'm quite honored to be part of this project, and hopefully we'll do many more in the future, right?
Yes, hoping. Like, look, we've been lucky enough that, during the time that I've been at UC, we've done, I think, at least 4 of them. So yeah, they've definitely been rolling, and not all of them with artists. I think 2 of them were just direct builds out of something that came out of our heads for Enlighten, for example. But yeah, the other 2 most certainly has been with artists, and both of them have been really successful, and people have really engaged with it really well. And ultimately that ticks the box from our kind of institutional point of view, but then it does the right thing by Canberra as well, and most certainly by the artist. And, people have a bit of entertainment out of it at the same time. So yeah, it's good.
Sure. Awesome. Well, this is a wonderful finale to this first introductory blog, I guess. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you, and to discuss these finer details that people, they don't really know about, and hopefully it will kind of give a bit more meat to the story, because there's so much story behind, these kind of ambitious, I would call this an ambitious project, especially during this time, and it's just a wonderful stepping stone, to newer and more exciting and more innovative projects. It's a wonderful thing. So thank you again, Ashley.
No, thank you for being part of it.
Absolutely. Have a great one, my friend.
Take care.
Bye. Whoa! That was cool, man. Is it off? I don't stop recording. Yes.